John Diefenbaker, the Prime Minister who put rights before power. In August 1979, my wife and I carried our newborn son into a moment of Canadian history. He was only 18 days old. John Diefenbaker, Canada's former Prime Minister, had died, and thousands gathered in Saskatoon to say goodbye. Inside that enormous national farewell, our family experienced a tiny moment of its own. As I remember it, Prime Minister Joe Clark reached toward our newborn son. My wife instinctively turned the baby away. It happened in an instant. A young mother protecting her child. One Prime Minister reaching toward the next generation. Another Prime Minister passing into history. One generation was leaving. Another had just arrived. And between them stood a question every democracy must answer: what kind of country will our children inherit? John Diefenbaker came from the Canadian Prairies. Before Ottawa and Parliament, there were wheat fields, railway towns, courtrooms, immigrant families, Indigenous communities, farmers, workers, and people who often believed distant power did not hear them. Diefenbaker understood the feeling of being an outsider. He came to believe that Canadian citizenship should never depend on ancestry, surname, religion, race, or region. He called his vision One Canada. It sounded simple, but its meaning was demanding. One Canada meant that no citizen should be treated as less Canadian than another. Government did not create human dignity. Government was supposed to recognize it, protect it, and answer when it violated it. Our second metamorphic image shows Diefenbaker beneath an immense Saskatchewan sky. From a distance, we see one determined political figure. Up close, his face and coat are built from farmers, railway workers, immigrants, Indigenous citizens, courtroom witnesses, small-town families, and people gathering in public halls to be heard. A railway begins on the prairie and runs toward Parliament. The national speaker was formed by people who believed the national government had forgotten them. Diefenbaker became famous for his voice. He could be forceful, theatrical, and commanding. His hand would rise. His expression would tighten. His words would fill the House of Commons. But democratic speech matters only when power can be answered. Our third image places him inside Parliament. The central aisle becomes his spine. Government and opposition benches form his coat. Citizens' letters shape the lines around his mouth. Journalists create one eye. Canadians watching Parliament create the other. The image carries a simple truth: Parliament is not the private stage of the government. It is where government must be questioned, challenged, examined, and held accountable. Diefenbaker also supported simultaneous interpretation in the House of Commons. Members speaking English or French needed to understand one another if Parliament was going to represent the country it governed. Language was not merely technical. It was part of belonging. A citizen should not become politically invisible because someone refuses to hear the language in which that citizen speaks. But the center of Diefenbaker's legacy is the Canadian Bill of Rights. Before Canada had the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, he argued that fundamental freedoms had to be formally recognized. Freedom of speech. Freedom of religion. Freedom of assembly. Freedom of association. Equality before the law. Life, liberty, and security of the person. These were not supposed to be favors granted by a generous government. They were protections against government itself. Our fourth image shows Diefenbaker holding the Bill of Rights between citizens in a dark government corridor. The document is not made from ink alone. Its lines become streets. Its columns become courtrooms. Its words become newspapers criticizing power, people worshiping freely, citizens gathering peacefully, and families petitioning Parliament. Behind the document are closed offices and censored papers. Not because all government is evil, but because every government possesses power. And power without limits eventually begins to treat its own convenience as more important than the citizen. The Bill of Rights was historic. But it was not perfect. It was federal law rather than entrenched constitutional protection. It did not bind the provinces in the same way the later charter would. Courts often interpreted it cautiously. The achievement was real. The work remained unfinished. The same is true of First Nations voting rights. For generations, many status First Nations people faced discriminatory restrictions on federal voting. They could be governed by Canadian law while being denied an equal federal voice unless they surrendered legal status through an unjust process. Indigenous leaders had already petitioned, argued, and demanded political rights. Some also carried legitimate concerns. Would voting weaken treaty rights? Would participation be used to undermine status, lands, or Indigenous nationhood? In 1960, federal law changed so status First Nations people could vote without surrendering status. That was an important reform. But it was not a gift from one politician to passive people. It was one step in a much longer Indigenous struggle for rights, treaties, political voice, and self-determination. Our fifth image therefore places the Indigenous voter at the moral center. Diefenbaker's profile surrounds the scene, attentive but secondary. One eye is formed from treaty papers and letters from Indigenous leaders. The other is formed from polling stations and citizens casting ballots. The ballot enters the box as light. But the treaty remains visible. The message is clear: a democracy is incomplete while people governed by its laws are denied a meaningful voice within it. And inclusion does not end history. It changes its course while leaving further responsibilities behind. Diefenbaker's belief in racial equality also shaped Canada's role in the Commonwealth. In 1961, South Africa's apartheid system became central to debate over whether it should remain in the organization. Apartheid classified human beings by race, controlled movement, separated communities, and preserved political power for a white minority. African and Asian Commonwealth leaders opposed allowing South Africa to remain without confronting that system. Diefenbaker stood with those refusing to treat apartheid as acceptable. South Africa withdrew its application. That Canadian stand mattered. But our sixth image does not make Diefenbaker the central hero of the anti-apartheid struggle. The emotional center belongs to the people who lived under apartheid and resisted it directly. African families, workers, communities divided by law, leaders confronting racial hierarchy. The Commonwealth table becomes a bridge across the image. Canada played a role. But the struggle belonged first to those who endured the system. That is how democratic heroes must be examined. We recognize the good without stealing the courage of others. And we acknowledge failure without pretending the good never happened. Diefenbaker's record also contained painful decisions. None remains more controversial than the cancellation of the Avro Arrow. The Arrow represented extraordinary Canadian engineering ambition. Designers, technicians, factory workers, test pilots, and families believed they were building proof that Canada could lead in advanced aerospace technology. When the program was cancelled in 1959, jobs disappeared, families were disrupted, and expertise scattered. Supporters of the decision pointed to cost, changing military strategy, missile technology, and uncertainty about the aircraft's future role. Critics saw lost innovation, increased dependence on the United States, and the destruction of Canadian industrial potential. Our seventh image refuses to offer a simple verdict. Diefenbaker's troubled face merges with the aircraft. The Arrow's nose forms the bridge of his nose. The cockpit becomes one eye, filled with engineers and ambition. The other eye is formed from radar systems, defense documents, and strategic uncertainty. Workers leaving the plant become the shadow beneath his coat. This is the burden of leadership. A prime minister can advance rights in one chapter and create lasting pain in another. Democracy does not require us to worship leaders. It requires us to examine them honestly. Diefenbaker's achievements do not erase the consequences of the Arrow decision. The Arrow decision does not erase the Bill of Rights. History becomes meaningful when we refuse to flatten it into sainthood or condemnation. That brings us back to the funeral. The train carrying Diefenbaker west became a moving national farewell. Canadians gathered beside the railway as an old political fighter returned to Saskatchewan. At the final service, Joe Clark declared that John Diefenbaker was home. And somewhere within that ceremony, my wife and I held our first child. Our son knew nothing about Parliament. Nothing about the Bill of Rights. Nothing about apartheid, elections, aircraft, or government power. He was simply a newborn being carried into the country he would inherit. Our final metamorphic image brings every symbol together. The funeral railway becomes a civic pathway. The aisle of Parliament becomes the same road. The Bill of Rights becomes courthouse steps. The ballot becomes light. The Commonwealth table becomes a circle where citizens meet. The Avro assembly line remains as a reminder that political decisions always have human consequences. Diefenbaker's face rises above the scene. Then the face begins to recede. The citizens become clearer. Indigenous leaders, new Canadians, journalists, judges, workers, farmers, families, peaceful demonstrators, voters, children, people who disagree but remain committed to democracy. An adult walks beside a child toward Parliament. One generation holds the hand of the next. That is where the meaning of one Canada must finally live. Not in one prime minister. Not in one political party. Not in one speech. Not even in one law. It lives whenever citizens defend rights for people they do not personally know. Whenever Parliament answers difficult questions instead of hiding from them. Whenever journalists expose abuses of power. Whenever voters refuse to surrender responsibility to personality. Whenever minorities are protected from the convenience of the majority. Fascism does not always arrive wearing a uniform. It begins whenever power decides that some citizens matter less. When criticism becomes disloyalty. When the leader becomes greater than the law. When Parliament becomes theater instead of accountability. When rights become privileges reserved for the obedient. Diefenbaker believed government must never become greater than the rights of the individual. His answer was One Canada. But One Canada was never a finished monument. It was an unfinished responsibility. I still remember that day in Saskatoon. The funeral. The crowd. Joe Clark reaching toward our newborn son. My wife turning protectively away. A tiny family moment inside a national farewell. One generation was leaving. Another had just arrived. And now the question remains, who inherits Canada? We all do. But inheritance is not ownership. It is responsibility. Leaders leave the frame. Governments change. Monuments age. Rights survive only when citizens understand that those rights must belong to everyone, or eventually they will belong to no one. John Diefenbaker asked Canada to become one country under equal law. The work continues. Fascism dies when the world is watching. Canada is watching net. And so is the world. Support democracy. Stand with those resisting authoritarian power. Support Ukraine through United 24 Media. Big Dave, Canada is watching net. Big hugs.